Welcome.
Good morning.
Today is a happy Parsha because the entire week we're living with Avram Avinu. The last two Parshas had some interesting components to them, which were less than joyous. The world being wiped out, humanity for the most part, Hashem being upset, the fact that first murder occurred in Bereshis, the first sin, many other things that were taking place which are less than desirable. So if you go with the Parsha every day and you learn the section that's for that day of the week, it's some days were very exciting Parshas and some were less. But Parshas Lech Lecha is a Parsha that every single day we're living and we're involved with learning the life and the journey of Avram Avinu, the very first Yid, and seeing the decisions that he made and his attitude that he had towards Hashem and how he dealt with life and how he overcame many, many challenges and how he was strong in his faith. You see, you have the opportunity to live with him and appreciate that, and therefore it's considered to be a happy week. Every single day is exciting. Parshas Lech Lecha has many components. I want to focus today on a certain detail. In general, we have a principle that the Avos, our ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they fulfilled the Torah, they kept the mitzvahs, even before it was technically given. Because Avram was born in the year 1948 from creation. Torah was given in the year 2448. But up until that point, Avram still kept the mitzvahs. Yitzchak kept the mitzvahs, Yaakov kept the mitzvahs. But there are certain mitzvahs which have a special uniqueness to them. They're considered to be more cherished because we find that Torah, or Midrashim, commentaries tell us that Avram did these mitzvahs before. And I'll share the following. Avram invented, if you will, Shachris. The fact that we daven every morning, and it has to be during the morning time, we get that from Avram. Torah says he woke up early. It's the idea of davening. He came up with this idea of davening in the morning. Yitzchak, he did two mitzvahs. He obviously did everything, but he brought two mitzvahs to us. Number one was mincha, and number two is meiser, tithing. That concept of giving 10% of what you earn, 10% of your produce, he gave that to, he did that, and therefore we do it. Yaakov Avinu had Ma'ariv, invented Ma'ariv, and Gid Hanoshe, the prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve, which is a story that happened with Yaakov, we'll learn when we get to that parsha, comes from Yaakov Avinu. We have that prohibition as well. Now, obviously, whatever we have to do or don't do is not because they did it. It's because Torah told us to do it. And actually, we could learn interesting details about it, but the commandment is not because Avram did it. But nonetheless, in the Rambam, he brings that we have the prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve, we know it from Yaakov, and the concept of giving tithing, we know from Yitzchak, and the idea of prayer, Shachar, from Avram, and the afternoon prayer, Mincha, is from Yitzchak, and evening prayer, Ma'ariv, is from Yaakov, the third one. The question is why? One of the interesting stories that we have in today's Parsha is the Great War, World War I, but this is really the first war that Torah tells us in the Torah among empires, among kingdoms. You had wars, you had various, fighting, unfortunately, and killing and so on. But when you have kingdoms that are fighting with each other, the first time that occurs is in this parsha. And you had a group of 5 kings that were coming from one side, and then you had the 4 kings that were coming from the east, and they were fighting with the 5 kings. It was a big war. Now, 5 kingdoms against 4 kingdoms, amazingly, the four kingdoms won. Okay, the four kings won, which tells us that they were much stronger, much mightier, more powerful than the five kings. Okay. Now, one of the cities they conquered, or one of the areas they conquered, was Sodom and Amorah. Bad cities, places where people were very cruel to one another. But Lot, Avram's nephew, he lived there. And Og, the giant, came running to Avram with information. He says, your nephew was captured. There was a war. The other side won, and they captured Lot. He's in captivity. Now there's a big debate and two opinions. Did Lot really mean well? Did Og really mean well when he came to tell Avram, by the way, your nephew was captured, or he had other plans? There's opinions that he was hoping that Avram will go and get killed, and then he'll marry Sarah. But be it as it may, he came to Avram and he told him that your nephew was captured.
What side was Og on?
The five Og, I don't know if he was on his side, but Lot was the one that was captured.
Yeah, Og didn't fight.
No.
Og lived a long time.
Yes, he lived a very long life. But he came in and gave information, your nephew was captured. Well, if he was on the other side, he'd be captured too, probably. Unless he's a giant, he's exempt. Probably. However, Avram, notwithstanding the fact that these four kings just defeated the five kings, he decided to go and save his nephew. Let's release him from captivity. Now, Avram didn't go himself. He went with his men. He had 318 people. It's no match to the four kings, mighty, victorious kings. And by the way, when you win, usually it empowers you. So not only were they strong, but they just won a great battle. And they were going with a tremendous pride. And Avram goes, and he fights with them, and he gets back his nephew, and he comes back. Now, he was greeted by a man named Malki Tzedek Melech Sholem. The custom back then was that when soldiers return, they are greeted with bread and wine. So Malki Tzedek Melech Sholem, the king of Sholem, which is a reference to Yerushalayim, he was the king in Yerushalayim, he went out and he greeted Avram and his men with wine and bread. Now, who was this Malki Tzedek Melech Sholem? Who was this king? He was a son of Noach by the name of Shem. Now, the 10 generations from Noach to Avram. So 9 from Shem to Avram. It's a long time. Especially in those days, people lived a very long time. So it's a big chunk of history. He was an old man, but he lived a very long life. And he was there. He was considered to be the Kohen of the time. The Kohen. Avram went and he gave Meiser, he gave 10% of everything that he owned, everything that he got from the war. He gave it to this Kohen, 10%. So if you think about who was first, was it Avram that gave Meiser or Yitzchak? Clearly it was Avram. Yitzchak wasn't born yet. He definitely didn't give Meiser yet. He didn't tithe. Why are we told that Avram, the Rambam says, Yitzchak came up with Mincha and with Meiser? Not only is it chronologically off, but Yitzchak only gave Meiser, he only tithed from things that grow, produce. He cultivated the field, he grew wheat and whatever else. He gave 10% to whoever had to get the tithing, Kayin, etc. Avram came back from a war, and he gave, from everything he gave 10%. So why is the source from Yitzchak and not Avram? And the Rabbi discusses this in a talk, and the Rabbi shares that there are two types of processes in the world. There are two things that go on. There are two ways that you feel or you see the success in life. One is a miraculous way, where it's clear to you, you didn't calculate this, you didn't think it was possible, according to what they say, this is not regular, and somehow, miraculously, it worked out. That's one way. The other way is when there's a natural outcome. You worked on something, you invested, you put in the time, the effort, and you see results. Two different ways of seeing the successes. I want to share with you a story. There was once a boy who grew up in a very wealthy home. His father was extremely rich, took care of all of his needs. This kid grew up. He's already an adult, and he's living at home. And he's not working. He's lazy. He's taking his time. He doesn't really do anything productive. He's just lounging around, sleeping in. And his father would always give him a hard time and say, do something with your life. Get a job. You're so lazy. You're not capable. You're good for nothing. And this would go on for days and weeks and months. And the son hated it, obviously. And one day he said, that's it. I'm going to leave my house. And I don't need this man anymore. And I don't need his money. And he left. Now, obviously, he had nowhere to go. And no experience, no skill, and no money. So he wandered around, but he couldn't bring himself to come back home. So he went to the park bench. He lied down and went to sleep like an animal. One day, second day, third day, he's really homeless. And all of a sudden, the guy walks up to him and he says, young man, why are you lying on a bench? I mean, you're sleeping on a bench. This is where you sleep. This is no way to live. Why don't you come to my house? I have a extra room in my basement. You could stay there, and in return, you could, you'll take care of my garden. You'll tend to my plants, my stuff. You'll deal with that. Okay, cool. So he goes there. He sleeps in this person's house. He helps out around the house. He does different chores. He works the garden, and he gives him a place to live and some food. And the host notices that this young man is very good at baking. So he tells him, I see you have a talent for baking. Why don't you get a job with the baker? I know a baker. I could try to arrange a job with you. He's like, a job? I don't have any education in baking. I don't have any, skill. I don't have, I baked at home. He says, no. I think you're good. I'll talk to him. I'll get you the job. And sure enough, he goes to the interview. He gets the job. And now he's a baker and he's getting paid. And he's doing well. And he's learning how to bake. And people are eating his stuff. And then one day the baker tells him, the owner of the bakery, why don't you go open your own bakery? You're obviously talented. You're skilled. Go open your own bakery. So he does. He opens his own bakery somewhere at the end of town. And it's a disaster. Okay, nobody comes. He's baking. Very few customers. He can't pay the rent. It's out of hand. A guy walks in one day. He says, wow, this stuff is delicious. Why are you located here? This is the worst place to have a bakery. I mean, this is not a part of town where people go. Why don't we become partners? You bake. I'll invest with you. And we'll open up a bakery in a mall. There's a lot of people that travel, that come by there. Foot traffic. We'll get you the stuff. You'll make some money. He says, okay, thank you. He goes there. And he's his partner. And he sets up. And he does very well. The partner knows a little bit about business. He teaches him a thing or two. He runs that side of things. And they do well. And then they do so well, they open up a second branch and a third branch. And before you know it, there are 5 of these bakeries around town. And as he's very successful in earning the money, he goes to his desk one day and he says, I think it's time to go home. I'll show my father what I've accomplished. I'm not such a lazy good for nothing. And he sits down to write a letter. And he writes, dear dad, contrary to everything you told me all this time, I am capable. And look what I built. And I have this chain of bakeries. And it's actually making money. And I'd love to reconcile. I want to get together. Next day, he gets a letter back from his father. Dear son, for educational purposes, I just want to clarify a few things. Remember that time you were lying on the bench for 3 nights in a park and some guy walked over to you and invited you to his house in exchange for doing some gardening? Which person takes a homeless guy on the bench without asking and without knowing him and brings him into his house for gardening? And I know how much gardening you know. You should know, he says, it was me. I sent a friend of mine to bring you into his house, and I paid him to have you there while you did some nonsense in the garden and around the house. And remember, you got a job as a baker. You have no skill as a baker. You were coming from nowhere. Okay, you baked a cake once in your house. It was my friend the baker. I paid your salary. I made sure he paid you. And remember, you got an offer to open your own bakery? Which baker hires an employee and then tells him, go open your own bakery? I arranged that. And when you failed, some guy walks in off the street, likes your cookies, and he says, let's become partners. What businessman does that? Because you know how to bake? I'm your partner. And I took care of all these investments all this time. And I'm glad you're successful. But let's just set the record straight. There are two ways that you go in life and you see your success and you see your results. One is when you notice and you feel that it's a miracle. Like Avram. He went with 318 people and he freed his nephew Lot from 4 kings who just defeated the 5 kings. It's a miracle. You don't win with a couple hundred people over 4 kings. It doesn't work that way. So he gets up and he says, okay, 10% I'm giving to Hashem because you feel that Hashem just saved you. You see it. Everything that you have right here is from Hashem. Like, no question. You're giving 10% right now. You want to give 10%. He's your partner. But Yitzchak, he was planting. He was working hard. There were no miracles there. He was working with nature. He cultivated the land. He waited. He plowed. He planted. Finally, he produced. And he comes and he says, 10% to Hashem, which means I appreciate, I recognize that it's not my efforts. Of course, I'm doing my part, but it's not me. Hashem is doing his part, and he's making all these things happen because you can put in all the effort you want in the world and have the best advice and the best training. But if you don't have the blessing of Hashem, it's not going to work. The Pasuk tells us Hashem will bless you in everything that you do, which means you have to do. You can't just sit there and say, Hashem is going to provide. But you have to remember that the blessing is what's causing the success. It's not the effort. The effort is a necessary tool. It must be there. That's why Hashem created the world. He wants it to work that way. But it doesn't happen from the work. Chassidus talks about this at length and gives us the example of a uniform, of clothes. Okay, you put on a garment. Let's say you're a security guard. The garment is not making you the security guard. It shows people that you're the guard, right? It's just it could be an empty suit.
Sure it does.
What?
Sure it does.
What, the garment, the security?
Do they know that they know how to fight? No, they just stay there.
Okay. The concept of clothes in general is an external factor, which is a component. Okay? Somebody who wants to come across, there's a discussion in the Gemara, in Ksubas, about if, God forbid, father passes away when his children are very young, and he leaves a large amount of money. Now, it goes to the kids. They're the inheritors. But what happens if they're young, they're minors, they're going to waste the money? Or somebody will come along and just take advantage of them because they don't get it. So the Jewish court appoints an apotropos, which means someone that oversees a court-ordered custodian or something like that, who's going to make sure that this money is dealt with properly. It's not just money. It could be fields. It could be properties. These things have to be tended to, or else he'll lose everything by the time they're adults. Now, obviously, this person is accountable to the Jewish court that he was responsible and he didn't squander away their money. One of the expenses that he's allowed to take money from their estate is for clothing, for himself. Because he's the negotiator and he has to come out there and talk to the various investors and deal with the decision making and make sure that this estate actually grows and doesn't get ruined. He needs that people should trust him and give what he says some credit, and he should be able to deal. So he has to put on nice clothes, says the Talmud. And therefore he could take money from their estate because he's dealing with their estate. Which tells you, of course, that the clothes are important, right? But it would be foolish to think that the close is what's making the deals. That the close is what's keeping the estate going. It's a piece. Our tools, our work that we put in, the efforts that we're applying in life, they're vital. But we're foolish if we think that that's what's causing the results. Hashem's blessing makes it happen. Yitzchak recognized that. He planted the fields. It was hard. It takes tremendous effort. But when it was all done, he gave 10% to Hashem. Because he said, I recognize, not just when it's a big miracle and we win wars and things are, everyone looks around and they say, wow, that was miraculous. That's one of the many lessons we learned from Avram and from Yitzchak. And that's why the Rambam chooses tell us about the mitzvah of Meiser from Yitzchak's behavior as opposed to Yaakov's. As opposed to Yitzchak's, thank you. As opposed to Avram's, yes. Thank you for joining. Share it, subscribe, comment.
Have a question.
Yes, question.